Hello, welcome back to the final part of this chapter. Here we are. An icy path flanked by frosted topiary, cut in its shapes of leaping fish, led back towards the house. In the other direction, a small jetty ran out onto the river. Roach and Mould's airship, Behemoth, was tied to the jetty's moorings post. Its bobbing Zepp balloon cast a torpedo-shaped shadow over the busy waters of the Thames, and the spiked gondola hovered a few feet above the pontoon, its rear cargo bay open. "We'll take that," Lily said. She grasped Papa's hand and Robert's, and they ran along the plank jetty towards the airship. "Should we wait for Mrs. Rust and the others?" she asked as they climbed into the cargo bay. "No need," Professor Silverfish stepped out from behind a piece of engine housing. "My men will take care of them." He pulled a gun from behind his back and pointed it at them. "I told you before, John, if you don't cooperate with my plan, one of these children would get hurt." "We can discuss this, Simon." John held up his hands. His face looked calm, but his legs were shaking. "I understand you need my help, but so does my daughter and her friend. Surely, after what's happened, we can still come to some arrangement." "It's too late for bargains," Professor Silverfish said. "I can't trust your words or actions. These children know how serious I am, but I think only a show of force will convince you." He pointed his gun at Robert's chest and clicked off the safety catch. Lily felt a sickening jolt of energy. Time seemed to slow. She saw Professor Silverfish squeeze his finger on the trigger. "No!" she cried, and she dived in front of Robert as the gun fired. A sharp, molten pain seared through Lily's body. The bullet cut through her skin and pierced her chest. Her teeth grated. There was a hollow ringing, and she felt the projectile bounce of something metal deep inside her. The momentary relief followed by a jitter, like springs unwinding, cogs catching. Her head span with dizziness. A sickly aching ached through her, and a carnation of red blossomed on her dress front. She clutched at her breast, pressing at the silk. It stuck to her ribs, warm blood dripping through her fingers, and dropped as she dropped to the floor. Robert kneeled beside her and grasped her hand, cradling in his. Papa dropped to his knees and threw his arms around her. Lily tried to sit up, tried to stay with them, but her limbs felt heavy, her bones brittle. She sensed her will fading, herself slipping away. Her head fell forward, lolling against Papa's shoulder. "Don't die, Lily," he whispered. "It's the heart. Don't let the bullet break your heart." Professor Silverfish's eyes widened. "The Cogheart's inside her? She's had it all along? Of course, what a fool I've been." Tears rolled down Robert's cheeks. Beside him, he felt John's body shaking, racked with sobs. "It was that terrible night," John said, "the night of the crash." He broke off and brushed a tear from his eye, glaring at Silverfish. "You tore my world apart that night, killed my beloved Grace. For what? Trying to steal the Cogheart. Because of you, I had to keep it. I had no choice. I knew it could save one of them, and I chose Lily, my only child. I took her to the hospital, and they operated, gave her the Cogheart. It saved her life, and now this." He couldn't finish. He buried his face into Lily's hair and sobbed. "What about me?" Professor Silverfish shouted at him. "What about our bargain?" "You?" John didn't even look at him. "You're not important. The way you've behaved, you don't deserve to live." Robert stroked Lily's fingers. They were still twined with his, but her breath had become shallow, and her grip was loosening, going limp. He glanced over his shoulder to see Roach and Mould running madly across the courtyard towards them. They stumbled up the loading ramp, coughing heavily. "We had to retreat, Professor," Roach mumbled, leaning on his cane. "John's mechanicals are destroying your home." "Never mind that," Professor Silverfish said. "We have what we want." He nodded at Mould. "You, go ready us for takeoff." Then he waved his gun at Robert, And you, Roach, get this boy off my ship. He's useless to me now. With pleasure. Mr. Roach wiped a hand across his face and he caught his breath. Then he grabbed Robert. Lily! Robert called out. She tried to turn her head, but only her eyes would move. The floor hummed beneath her, and the dull ache rippled round her chest. She watched as Roach dragged Robert by his arms to the end of the cargo ramp and threw him off. There was another figure at her side, but she could barely make out his face. It was so filled with shadows. "Papa, is that you?" she asked, squinting through the dim light, trying to see him. "You're still here? Promise me you won't leave me this time?" He nodded. "I promise. I'm sorry, my love. Sorry for everything. Sorry I never told you the truth about yourself and what happened. I was so worried you'd feel guilty, worried you wouldn't love me when you heard what I'd done. Worried about how weak you were, how the shock of all this would hurt you more." He brushed at her face, but most of all, worried I'd lose you to the truth, that I'd sacrifice Mama, my work, everything for you. Lily